محمد غانم، مستشار سياسي للمجلس السوري الأمريكي ومدير العلاقات مع الحكومة الأمريكية. محمد غانم, Senior Political Advisor and Director of Government Relations with the Syrian American Council. I'm going to be making this speech in English about the role of victims in Western Penal Code vis-a-vis our religious traditions. Since we're talking about religious traditions and transitional justice, I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about victims and their place in the transitional justice process vis-a-vis Western Penal Codes and our religious traditions. And I hope that this will be taken into consideration by any committee or government in the future responsible for setting up a transitional justice process and for setting this process in motion. Many of you yesterday, first of all, just a quick intro. Many of you yesterday highlighted the importance of transitional justice and how it is a key prerequisite for the national reconciliation we all want to have in future Syria. I.e., all of you are aware that acknowledging wrongs, redressing injustices, and making amends are essential for having the stability we all desire and for life to go back to normal and for Syrians to continue to live side by side like they have done for centuries. A successful transitional justice process can greatly help with stability and vice versa. The make it or break it factor is trust. If the victims and their families, those who suffered egregious human rights violations, the severity and uniqueness of which were stressed by all of you, almost all of you yesterday, trusted the process, they would not seek their own justice. This is the key point. They would not seek their own justice. However, if they didn't trust the process or they viewed the process with suspicion as some sort of a political settlement, not concerned with their claims, they would take matters into their own hands, triggering violence and counter-violence, especially in the country where most of the victims, at least the ones that I know the perpetrators, know those who committed violations against them by name. And given how Assad has militarized Syrian society, first by the insertion of the Shabiha militias, and then by instituting the National Defense Army, Syria would descend into anarchy and an all-out civil war, real civil war would start. So establishing trust would be the first main challenge. Now the key point. For the transitional justice process to win the trust of the victims, it has to ensure that they are part and parcel of the process, not mere bystanders. Restorative justice, a modern critique of Western criminal justice, maintains that Western penal codes, Western criminal justice are offender-focused. It is offender-focused, and therefore re-victimize victims. Howard Zare, the father or the grandfather of restorative justice, says, we don't seek to give them back some of what they have lost, the victims. We don't let them help decide how the situation should be resolved. We may not even let them know what has transpired since the offense. They're not to be part of the solution. Victims are not even part of our understanding of the problem. Why? It's because of the legal definition of crime. Crime in Western penal codes, in the criminal justice system, is defined as a violation or an offense against the state. So the state takes the place of the victims. The legal system is an adversarial process conducted by professionals who stand in for the offender and the state, refereed by a judge. Outcomes are imposed by an authority, law, judges, juries, who stand outside the essential conflict. Victims, community members, even offenders rarely participate in this process in any substantial way. Now, so the legal definition of crime is that it's a violation against the state. Victims are not part of the definition of crime in Western penal codes. Now, that was the bad news. The good news. The good news is the law of homicide and bodily harm is governed by the principle, and this is important for transitional justice, it's governed by the principle of private prosecution in Islam. The plaintiff is the dominus litis. That's Latin for the person to whom the case belongs. The prosecution, the continuation of the trial, and the execution of the sentence are conditional upon his or her will. It's not upon the judge, the will of the judge. Prior to the execution of the sentence, the prosecutor, in Islam, the victim's next of kin, may pardon the defendant or accept a financial settlement. The judge cannot interfere. The state only plays a subsidiary role. In Western Penal Code, the state plays a major role, the main role. Victims are bystanders. It's very different here. Victims play the main role, and the state plays a subsidiary role. Even in Sunni law, a sentence of retaliation can be passed only if all prosecutors demand it, which means that if even one of them, just one of them, chooses to pardon the killer, retaliation cannot take place and the sentence cannot be passed. Also, now since the assent of all minors, all children, is required, a judge can even award retaliation if there are minors among the prosecutors until the youngest one, 5-year-old, 3-year-old, until the youngest one has reached majority and can validly express his or her will. In a nutshell, in Islamic law, the victim is heavily involved in the process, in the justice process, and not a mere bystander. The dignity of victims is restored not by imposing harsh laws, but by putting victims in the driver's seat. Human beings are much more likely to pardon and exercise forgiveness when they feel vindicated and when their dignity, that the crime stripped, is restored. Now, quickly, two last things, very quickly. This is something that we Muslims need to do awareness raising in Syria about that. The execution of criminal sentences is the exclusive competence of the state. The execution of criminal sentences is the exclusive competence of the state. تنفيذ الأحكام الجزائية مهمة للدولة والإجماع وليس عند الفقهاء خلاف في هذا إطلاقا ولا يحق للأفراد تنفيذه. So FSA groups, other councils do not have the right to execute sentences. It's only the state. That's exclusive competence of the state. Otherwise, it would be a violation of the law. Second thing about the question that some of you asked yesterday: how far do we go when we hold people accountable? How far do we go when we hold people accountable in the transitional period? This is in fact a question about criminal responsibility. The law in Islam is based on the principle of individual responsibility. As the people said here, persons are punished for their own acts. Collective punishment is not allowed. And there are 3 requirements. This is important. There are 3 requirements for the application of legal punishment. Number 1.